Hi! This time I want to talk about a couple of things. The first one was inspired by a comment made by one of my viewers, Runwise Gamgee. He was basically asking what I thought about role-playing games being described as a conversation, because sometimes in some role-playing game books, core books and manuals and such, they tell you a role-playing game is a conversation. I gave him a brief response, but I want to elaborate more in this video about that. And I am also going to talk about what some people refer to as player authorship or game master authorship as well. Although I would rather say player narration and game master narration, or perhaps description. Well, let's start with the thing about role-playing games being a conversation. I think this is wrongfully applied. A few years back, I didn't pay too much attention to that. I'm pretty sure that I went through some RPG books and manuals, core books, etc. and I read that, and I didn't really think about what it meant, but I think it's wrongfully applied. Because a conversation is very different from playing a role-playing game. A conversation is typically like, "Hey, how are you? I'm fine, and you?" "Yes, I'm fine as well." "So what have you been doing lately?" "Well, I have been playing this or that." "Oh, was that fun?" "Yes, it was really fun." So it's about that, and it's about asking questions. In a conversation, you usually ask questions. I'm going to put a link in the description to my video covering tips and advice when it comes to role-playing games. In the first video, I talk about why asking questions is not advisable. You will see what I mean if you watch that video. It's the video Crouching Gygax Hidden Arneson. So yes, it's very different from a role-playing game from playing an RPG. In a role-playing game, when you're actually playing, you're not having a conversation. You are describing your character's actions. You are talking as your character. And the game master is telling you what happens based on your actions. What happens when you attack the enemy, when you talk to that non-player character, when you examine that section of the room, etc. So it's not exactly a conversation, in my opinion. I think it wrongfully leads you towards asking questions. Can my character attempt this? And the game master is yes. If I use this spell, am I going to get a bonus? Yes. And if I use this magical item, am I going to get this? And the game master is like, no, it won't work like that, or it won't happen. Okay, can I try this other thing? Or maybe the game master says yes, but the bonus is going to be +1 instead of +2. Okay, can I try this other thing? And that's the clumsiest way of running a role-playing game. Instead of telling what your character is doing, describing your character's actions, I want to enter that room, and I am going to cast something, depending on the role-playing game, clear vision or see invisibility or whatever. And then the game master tells you if the spell was a success, or if you need to make a roll, or yes, make this roll, or if you spotted some invisible enemy or object, etc. So it's all about that, keeping that flow of the RPG experience. So definitely, I had already communicated to Runwise Gamgee, and I think he agrees that it's wrongfully applied. But I really want to put emphasis in that a conversation is very different. You are not talking to the game master, you are describing to everyone. You're not having a conversation with the game master or with the other players in the session. You are just describing what your character is doing, and then carrying out your actions using your skills, your powers. You are role-playing. You are playing a role-playing game. You are not exactly having a one-on-one or a conversation with the group. You are just stating what your character is doing. Okay, now let's move on to the other thing. Player authorship and game master authorship. I think this also has to do with narrating success. First, I want to clarify something. I like mechanisms usually in indie role-playing games, or in some other role-playing games. Some trends have been made more popular, But I like I said, those mechanics where it says something like, if you spend this point, or if you roll a specific number or whatever, you get to describe or narrate something affecting the game world. That is, as a player, suddenly you have control over the game world. You can introduce a detail, an element, you can introduce a non-player character, you can modify something. For a moment, the player turns into a game master. And, well, in the case of the game master, because you are running not only the non-player characters, you are also running the entire world. You are controlling the weather, you are telling the players the effects of different magical or psionic things, the anything concerning combat. You are basically representing the world and the non-player characters. So, obviously, the game master has... I don't like the word authorship. Let me make a small pause. I think that there are many frustrated authors and frustrated actors that have made their way into the hobby because it has become a bit more popular when compared to other decades, recent years. Role-playing games are a bit more popular nowadays. So obviously sometimes you find people of different walks of life moving into the hobby. But that's no problem at all. Everyone should be welcome. Everyone should be welcome to play any role-playing game. That is, as long as you're not going to be forced to play with someone you don't like. But everyone should be able to purchase role-playing games and play them with the people that they like. But I think that there is sometimes a disingenuous, perhaps even malicious intent of deforming or distorting what a role-playing game is. So maybe some frustrated authors and frustrated actors have made their way into the hobby and they start to turn things into like a novel or a book, writing a book, or having like a play acting, sort of like a beer and pretzels play acting session. So I think that this distorts the purpose of role-playing games. You are not an author. You are playing a role-playing game. You are not thinking what is going to happen to the characters. You're not going to be dictating what happens. That is resolved based on the ideas of the player characters, the reactions of the non-player characters, the checks that have been going on during the session. So there's there's greater influence when it comes to the effects of chance, but also clever ideas and interesting descriptions that are not set in stone. When you are writing a book, you are already determining what is going to happen. You can randomly determine everything about a book, but you are still not playing a game. You have a narrative that is being shaped by the author, but a role-playing game is an experience, a collaborative experience that has no place for that single-mindedness. Even if you are playing a solo role-playing game, that is to be determined by the opposition that results from different Game Master oracles, the tables, random elements. Sometimes it makes sense with the actions and the fiction as the things are proceeding based on the rules of the RPG that you are using. So it's very different. So that being said, I think that it's great that there are some role-playing games that have those mechanisms that spend this point or make this roll, and if you roll this, the player gets to insert a detail, change something about the situation, but it has to do with the mechanics. There is a wrong way of applying this, I would say, that is divorced from this mechanics aspect that I told you about a few moments ago. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I watched this really good video. It was a Spanish channel by the name of Culpa del Rol. I think it was Culpa del Rol. It basically means it's the fault of the role, like role-playing. It's the fault of the role. And in that video, it was very funny because the YouTuber was describing this situation. You had this character dressed in like a Victorian outfit, and it looked like a Call of Cthulhu type of scenario. And obviously the YouTuber was cosplaying as this Victorian investigator, and he was describing the situation as the referee or game master. He was saying, "You are moving through the dark tunnels of the sewers." and suddenly you see something before you. It is mind-breaking. It is awful. Now describe what you see. So, what a horrible way to break the tension, to break the horror. You are basically telling the player to tell you, to inform the table what he or she is looking at. That's so lazy. That's so lazy for a game master or dungeon master or referee. It's basically like, oh, you come up with something. You think of the enemy that you encountered. And there are some RPGs like that. I don't like those, but like I said, those things, it makes no sense. Usually when it comes to the mechanics that I told you, that if you spend this point or if you spend this card, you have like this player intrusion. So sometimes it is referred to as that, where the player like interrupts and in some way modifies the scene. Usually the player is going to do that to insert something in the favor of the party or the player if it's just a single player. So it's something beneficial. It doesn't have to do with surprises, except surprising the game master, and that's perfect, that's fine. As game masters, we should be surprised by the actions of our players. That's part of the fun. And dealing with those unexpected things. But like I said, it should be part of the mechanics of the game. It shouldn't be like, oh, you figure something out. It's quite ludicrous, in my opinion. I also think that when it comes to the things that can be controlled by the player and the game master, they are also, I would say, definable. In the case of the player, you should have total control over the actions of your player character. Your attacks, your spells, your interactions, what you say, what you do, where you move, if you want to jump, if you want to climb, you have complete control over that. But it's another matter if you succeed at whatever it is you are trying. And the game master should have control over the non-player characters, the conflicts of the game world, the weather, anything concerning the physics, the laws of physics in the world, unless those laws are affected by a spell of the player. So I also find it a bit ridiculous or in poor form when a player is trying to control the actions of non-player characters and the game world. And the game master shouldn't be able to control the actions of the player characters. Like controlling what they do, what they say, what they think, what they feel, unless it is an external factor. If you tell the player like, you feel cold, that's because it's a cold environment. Or if it's the player is under the effect of some spell or madness or something, or insanity, then the game master can take some greater control because you are not yourself when you are insane. That could be further determined or handled during session 0, but in most cases that's how you handle those mind control or charm situations or insanity, bouts of insanity. I think this also has to do with narrating success and failure. It's like in real life. Imagine. You could be the most skilled martial artist. You are incredibly skilled martial artist. And you know how to punch, how to kick, how to apply locks, holds. But it is somewhat impossible to predict the exact way in which the opponent is going to suffer those effects. You know that a well-placed blow to the chin can knock out someone. You can knock out a person, but you don't know if that person is going to topple over forward or backwards. You kind of get a great idea of the trajectory, but it's still impossible to determine it. It's still like the law of chaos in Jurassic Park. Sometimes you attack your opponent, and the opponent has like this delayed knockout effect. Suddenly the opponent starts striking back, and after throwing 2 or 3 hits, the opponent passes out. He's knocked unconscious. It's kind of like in the Wild West, Old West, you have the name of this Yo Young. I think he was Joe Young. He was a very skilled shootist, a gunfighter. And when he met his end, his enemy actually shot him in the neck. That's deadly. You get shot in the neck, you're going to bleed out. But he had it could be adrenaline, it could have been his strength of spirit. He actually got on his horse and started chasing after the one who shot him. He chased him into a forest, he killed his enemy with a well-placed shot, and then he died. You see, that's very difficult to predict. So when it comes to successes, I think the game master should always narrate or describe the successes and the failures of the player characters, and that's my opinion. You can handle it however you like. But as a player character, you can describe the way that you are attacking, what you are using, anything related to your actions. I'm going to attack with an uppercut. I'm going to attack with my chainsword. I'm going to pull out my axe and strike. I'm going to shoot with my rifle. And then the game master describes the wounds, or if the attack was a miss. Oh, the enemy parried your blade to the side with his axe, or maybe the character got shot and now you see this stream of blood just bursting out. The shot was so destructive. Maybe you used some sort of grenade or rocket launcher, and the game master gets to describe how the pieces of the body fly everywhere, because the game master is in control of the world, of the physics of the world. And the same applies to failure. It could be, and I've made a video about this, I think it's in the list, in the playlist below, that there are some frustrated game masters when it comes to participating as a player character. They act like player characters, but they are actually crypto game masters. And they try to dictate everything about the situation. They have that desire to enjoy the pleasures of running a game, but without the responsibilities. So they basically want to throw a wrench in the narrative. You have this very shared story that was not written as a book, that was produced because of the interactions of the player characters with the world, and suddenly this player wants to throw a wrench into it, wants to move this situation in a particular railway, and then he wants the game master, or perhaps even the other players as well, to deal with the mess that the player created. He wasn't even going to follow up with whatever randomness he introduced. So yes, I find that very nonsensical and clumsy when it comes to running a tabletop RPG. So yes, those are my basic thoughts. A role-playing game is not a conversation. A role-playing game is a game where you are playing a role. In a role-playing game, the game master and the player, they are not authors. And certainly they are not actors either. They are not going to be turning in the best case scenario, I would say, they are not going to turn the session into their own little book writing session. They are not going to turn things into this sort of play acting troupe activity. Although I like role-playing games in the troupe style, but that's very different. For those of you that do not know what that is when you have a game master that sometimes participates as a player character, and the player character then becomes the game master. Obviously, this works better with adventures or scenarios that are self-contained, episodic, perhaps you could say, so that there are no spoilers, or the spoilers are so overarching that you can spoil certain things within the campaign or chronicle, but that still won't ruin the final outcome of the entire campaign or chronicle. But like I said, yes, you're playing a role-playing game. You are not writing a book or reading from a script. And the game master controls the non-player characters, the game world, the weather, the effects, the laws of physics, what happens when something is affected by an external object, and where an object is affected by some external force. And the player characters, the players, are going to be controlling every action of their characters. Even if the enemy got lucky and he skewers or impales the player character is dying, the game master is going to describe the wound, but the player can describe he's trying to block the hole so that the blood stops flowing. He's trying to stop the blood from coming out, and maybe he says some dramatic parting words. Or like I said, in the case of actions of the player character, you are going to be describing the techniques, what you are saying, what you are doing, but the effects, when you are playing as your monk and you suddenly strike the stone golem in the dead center of the solar plexus, the game master is going to describe the amazing explosion when your fist fragments the golem. Or maybe if it's an effect related to one of your powers, maybe you have like a quivering palm, a very specific effect that causes some repercussion or consequence on the body of your opponent. Then as a player you get to describe that. Maybe you have this attack that is like electric fist, depending on the role-playing game, and you get to describe the cool electricity running around the body of the opponent. And this, again, the player character is not going to be controlling the non-player characters or the other entities within the game world. You're not going to be saying that this vermin or insect or enemy appears or disappears. You can do that if the mechanics of the game allow you to do that, or if you want to apply a house rule, of course. But in normal circumstances, I would say it doesn't work like that. So those are my thoughts. Maybe you will agree or disagree with them. Let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.